Okay.
Back.
I'm back. But
Amongst
yeah,
the living.
hopefully with my multiple ramblings of I feel like repeating myself, this aspect of the demand for the US dollar, allowing them to just grow, and kind of bring us to where we are today, right? Because everyone also is backed by that same logic, right? If you like Canada's dollar is same thing, right? If people want to trade with Canada, both domestically and internationally,
Yeah.
all of those factors kind of get piled together to justify an evaluation of, hey, what is the Canadian economy worth? What is the Canadian dollar worth?
The true
What kind
value
of
of it. Yeah.
development, right? Future development are we able to justify?
Yeah.
All of those kind of little nitty gritty factors kind of
Yeah. Like
get
you could put it in
snowballed together. Yep.
like a flip scenario that like the US has their currency tied to oil, right?
Yep.
Well, you could hypothetically live in a world where no hardwood lumber is traded that isn't tied to the Canadian dollar because we're the largest source of, right? So
Yep.
you could, right? If it was in a world where like lumber was the main source of fuel still or something like that, like us in Russia
Yeah,
would be
or
like,
if we
yeah.
really didn't use like bricks to build houses, right? Like it was
Mm-hmm.
like or steel in general wasn't used to build
Yeah.
buildings, right? So it's like, oh my gosh, lumber is the most important thing for any type of shelter. And globally, it's all traded in Canadian dollars. Yeah, that would really boost the Canadian
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah, it's a
because it's
hypothetical
not
because
really
I
the
don't think,
Canadian economy, right? Because the economy is supposed to focus on uh, what is like bought and sold within the Canadian context, but it's the like economics of currency rather than the like Canadian economy that gets
yeah,
affected by that. Where okay, if my we always look at like the Canadian dollar to the US dollar, right? So if typically for every Canadian dollar you get 80 cents, let's say for in the US, well now if we have a situation where for every Canadian dollar we get 90 cents to the US dollar, well that means you can now go and buy uh I don't know what the percentage of that would be going from 80 to 90 off the
90,
top of
yeah.
my head. Was that like a uh I don't know. This is embarrassing trying to do mental math right now. It's like a 7%
Increase, yeah,
increase or
which is,
to go up the 10% there. Um but yeah, to do that, that's an increase in your purchasing power that you now globally can say, I want to buy a good from India, I want to buy a good from Russia, I want to buy a good from Egypt, and now I'm able to get more bang for my buck, right?
yeah,
So yeah, it's super important. It's really allowed to justify a lot of the success, I would argue, of the United States. Um, and kind of
for sure, that makes sense, yeah, because they're also
yeah
themselves a fairly large oil producer as well.
yeah because they're producing a lot, other countries are producing a lot, and I don't want to go as far as like I don't want to jump too far ahead with things and say we're starting to see a world where uh if you want to have a cynical view of how the petrodollar kind of functions, in that you're kind of cooking the books, if you understand that expression,
Yes,
where like
yes, I'm sure, yeah,
right like if that's the case, we're now running into a time where okay, it's 2023 and the justification for the US economy is kind of catching up with itself, right?
yeah,
And countries, there's a mixture of a lot of different reasons for why that's happening, but the kind of greatness that is the American economy is kind of showing its true colors, because if you get rid of um right, if some of these countries like OPEC, like the OPEC
decide to
nations or
pull out,
China or
yeah,
whatever, like if some countries are deciding not do their oil trades in US dollars, again, that it's not the US economy, but it hits the US economy super hard because the
Yeah.
value of their dollar and their purchasing
Drops.
power
Yeah.
globally, yeah, diminishes greatly, right? So yeah, I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole because then I need to feel
Fair.
like I need to
Yeah.
explain all the reasons why we're in that situation and blah 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 blah. But I hope you guys can, and I'm sure Jordan, you probably already know because we talk a lot, but regardless, I hope anyone who's listening is getting the implications at least of this idea of a petrodollar and how to artificially um, control currencies through supply and
And
demand.
value them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think that, it's easy to think, oh yeah, the US dollar, but I think a lot of people forget it's because it's connected to all oil sales.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, I guess the other kind of part that I didn't really touch upon, but when you have the status of the world's reserve currency, um, what that really means is that in theory, the US dollar is supposed to be the most stable currency in the world, right? It's supposed to be the equivalent of the store of wealth, right? That
Yeah.
definitely was like the case under the Bretton Woods Agreement because they did not have a choice other than, hey, we have X amount of gold. Gold is worth like X amount of dollars globally. Therefore, our currency is what it is,
Worth
right?
whatever. Yeah.
Um, when the kind of floating of the dollar and the petrodollar comes into play, it still maintains that status because there's kind of a guaranteed amount of trade that's probably going to happen globally within
Regardless.
a little
Yeah.
bit of wiggle room because of
Yeah.
the whole, yeah, oil and gas, as well as just the American economy in general, right? Like all of those factors where it's like, okay, safe enough. I can store my money as American dollars and I'll feel comfortable with that.
Yeah.
So many nations around the world in their own central banks uh, have US dollars, right? Like China is, I believe they are still the like number one country
Hold.
for
Yeah.
holding US
Just all.
treasuries.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Like, so yeah, it's not always in like cash. It sometimes are in like treasury bonds and
Yeah.
whatnot, but um,
It's to your point though.
it's
It's
yeah.
replaced gold in that
Yeah,
sense, right?
exactly.
Like
Right.
we used to have gold
Yeah, they'll store gold
to
in their vaults.
value, and now
Now it's like, oh,
it's
I'll store US
U.S.
dollars,
dollars.
right?
Yeah.
So that also increases the demand from an American side of things, where you're like, well, like if I'm America and Jordan, you're Canada, and you're like, I'm gonna buy some American dollars and just leave them in the central bank type of thing to kind of store some wealth. Um, yeah, I now get to like add that to the like demand side of things and
Yeah.
justify maybe increasing the supply,
Supply of the
right? Where it's
dollar.
like, oh,
Yeah.
so many people want my currency, I gotta add more so that
Yeah.
I can actually purchase all the things that I need, right?
Each. Yes. Yeah.
um but yeah, hopefully you're right, that all
It's
kind of
a
makes
lot.
sense
Yeah.
and that all that good stuff.
Yes.